They called him cursed, mocked him when his ranch dried up, when his family left, when his barn burned to the ground. But they didn't laugh for long, because just when they thought he was finished, he struck gold, and not just the kind that shines. This is the story of how one man lost everything and came back smarter, stronger, and richer than anyone in town. Please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Eli Mercer wasn't a man of many words, but his ranch spoke for him. 200 acres of family land passed down through generations. He'd worked it since he was a boy, and now, in his 50s, a widower, he worked it alone. The sun beat down day after relentless day, turning the earth to powder. It was summer, then fall, then winter, and still no rain. The sky remained a vast, empty blue. He'd walk the fields in the mornings, his boots kicking up dust, not the rich loam he remembered. The grass used to come up to his knees. Now it was brittle, yellowed straw, cracking underfoot. The air hung thick and still. Eli would check the main well first. He'd lower the bucket, listen for the splash. For weeks there had been no splash, just the dull thud of wood against dry rock. He'd stare down the dark hole, a hollow in the earth that seemed to mirror the hollow feeling in his gut. His cattle, once a proud herd, dwindled. Their ribs showed. They moved slow, like shadows. He'd watch them, a knot tightening in his chest. A few fell, one by one. The land gave nothing. His corn stalks stood like scarecrows, withered and dead before they even bore fruit. He knew what the town was saying. They whispered in the general store, mumbled outside the church. He was cursed, they said, paying for his father's sins, maybe. A scandal from long ago, something about land rights and a crooked deal. Eli never spoke about it. He just listened to the wind whistle through the dry branches and hoped the clouds would finally gather. He watched the horizon, day after day, for a sign. There was never one. The letter came on a Tuesday. The paper was stiff, the words precise and cold. It said, very clearly, that if he missed one more payment, the ranch would be repossessed. Eli held it in his hand, the edges crisp against his calloused palm. He knew what it meant. This wasn't a warning, it was a final verdict. Paul Danton, the banker, arrived the next morning. His buggy kicked up a cloud of dust, a proper vehicle for a man of the town. Danton was too neat, his suit always pressed, his smile a little too wide, like he was trying to sell something even when he wasn't. He sat across Eli's kitchen table, the worn wood a stark contrast to Danton's polished shoes. Eli, Danton started, his voice smooth. We've been patient, more than patient, some might say. He leaned back, a slight smirk playing on his lips. I've already had a few inquiries about the land, actually. Good, solid offers. It's prime property, even in this condition. He gestured vaguely towards the window, where the parched fields stretched. Eli looked at his hands, then at Danton. Just need a little more time, Paul, he said, his voice rough. The rains, they'll come, they always do. I can make it right. He looked Danton in the eye, a direct plea. Danton's smirk widened. He shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement. No, Eli, I'm afraid not. The bank has its rules. Business is business. He stood, adjusting his cuffs. It's a shame, really, but you brought this on yourself, didn't you? He didn't wait for a reply. Danton just turned, walked out, and climbed back into his buggy. Eli watched him go, the dust cloud swallowing the vehicle. He didn't move from the table for a long time. The silence in the house felt heavy, like a weight. Jacob, Eli's son, arrived a week later. He drove a city car, sleek and black, which seemed out of place on the dusty track. Jacob had left for the city years ago, said the ranch life was too slow, too dirty. He wore city clothes too, light fabric, no dust on his shoes. He looked at the cracked earth, the dying cattle, and shook his head. Dad, Jacob began, his voice tight with impatience. This is madness. Look at this place. It's dead. You're going to lose everything. Just sell it. Come live with me. I have a guest room. It's small, but it's clean. You can get a job, something easy. You can't stay here. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting around like he was looking for an escape route. Eli stood by the porch post, his gaze fixed on the horizon. This is my home, Jacob. Your mother's home. This land is in my blood. He pointed to the fields. It just needs rain. It'll come back. Jacob scoffed. Rain? This isn't a temporary dry spell. It's a drought. This place is done. You're a stubborn old fool chasing ghosts. He threw his hands up in exasperation. You're throwing away your last chance. What am I supposed to do when you're out on the street? Eli turned, his face unreadable. You do what you always do, Jacob. You live your life. Jacob stared at him, then let out a frustrated sound. He climbed back into his car, the engine roaring to life. He drove off, leaving Eli standing on the porch, alone with the dust and the silence. The house felt emptier than usual. Eli walked inside, the floorboards creaking under his weight. He stopped in the living room, near the old armchair where his wife used to sit. The space felt vast now. He was completely alone. The smoke started subtle, a wisp against the evening sky. Eli had just finished a meager supper, the kind that didn't quite fill you up. He stepped outside to check on the last few cows, a habit more than a hope. That's when he saw it. A glow, a flickering orange behind the barn. His stomach dropped. He didn't run, he just walked, a slow, heavy pace towards the growing light. By the time he got close, the flames were licking up the wooden walls, greedy and bright. The hay inside crackled, feeding the fire. There was no doubt in his mind. This wasn't an accident. He felt it in his bones, arson. He stood there, watching the barn that had stood for generations, the place where his father had taught him to mend fences, where his own son had played hide and seek. It burned. The townsfolk started to gather. Headlights appeared on the road. Figures emerged from the darkness, drawn by the orange glow. They stood at a distance, a silent semicircle of faces, illuminated by the firelight. No one moved to help. No one brought buckets, or tried to break down a door. They just watched. Eli could hear whispers carried on the hot wind. Had it coming, one voice said, clear as day. Another, a laugh, low and cruel. He didn't turn his head. He just stared at the inferno, the heat on his face. The roof caved in with a roar, sending sparks high into the night sky. The last of the cattle inside, the few he had left, would be gone. When the last timbers collapsed into a pile of smouldering ash, the townsfolk slowly dispersed, their silhouetted forms melting back into the darkness. Eli stood there for a long time, the smell of smoke thick in the air, the ashes warm beneath his feet. The night was quiet again, except for the occasional crackle of dying embers. The fire stripped him bare. With the barn gone, what little he had left became precious and necessary to sell. First went the remaining cattle, a small, sad herd driven off by a buyer who didn't even haggle much, knowing Eli's desperation. Then the tools, a sturdy plough his father had owned, a set of wrenches, even the old tractor, its tires bald. Each piece felt like a limb leaving his body. People came to pick them up, their eyes lingering on his empty fields, a strange mix of pity and satisfaction on their faces. Then there was his wife's piano. It sat in the corner of the living room, a dark, gleaming monument to a life that felt very far away. He ran his fingers over the keys, the notes silent. He hadn't heard music in that house for years, not since she passed, but selling it, that hurt. He watched the men load it onto a wagon, the heavy wood scraping on his porch. He didn't look at them. With a few dollars in his pocket, enough for flour and coffee, Eli went back to the well. It was dry, had been for months, but he had to try. He borrowed a pickaxe and a shovel from an old, quiet neighbor who didn't ask questions. He lowered himself into the deep, dark hole, the air cool and thick around him. He started to dig. Hour after hour, day after day, he chipped away at the hard earth, deepening the well by inches, then feet. His muscles ached. His hands blistered, then calloused over. The dirt was dry, lifeless. The townsfolk would pass by on the road, going about their business. They saw him, a solitary figure, hauling up buckets of dirt. They didn't bother to whisper anymore. They just pointed. "Look at Eli Mercer," he heard one man say, loud enough for him to hear. "Digging for water where there ain't none. The fool." Laughter followed. It was sharp, distinct. Eli just kept digging. The sun beat down, but he kept at it, his face grim, sweat mixing with the dust on his skin. He was the local joke now, the old rancher who just wouldn't quit, even when everything was gone. Eli was deep in the well, the air cool and damp around him. He'd been at it for hours, the pickaxe rising and falling, a steady rhythmic thud against the earth. He'd broken through a layer of hard clay, then hit something different. The soil was darker now, almost black in places, with streaks of orange and crimson. It wasn't just dirt anymore. And then he saw it, small, impossibly bright flakes, winking in the beam of his headlamp. They were tiny, like sparks of light, embedded in the dark soil. He scraped a few of them out with his fingernail, holding them up closer to the light. They glinted, not like mica, which he knew. These felt heavier, looked softer. His heart gave a little jolt, a quick, unexpected thump against his ribs. He collected a small handful of the soil and the glittering flakes, careful not to lose any. He climbed out of the well, his movements slow, deliberate. He brushed the dust from his clothes, his eyes fixed on the small pile in his palm. He knew a man, an old friend named Silas. Silas had been a geologist before he retired to Tucson, a quiet fellow who knew more about rocks than anyone Eli had ever met. Eli wrapped the sample carefully in a piece of cloth, placed it in a small, sturdy box, and made the long trip into town. He mailed it from the post office, paying extra for express delivery, his face giving nothing away to the curious clerk. A few days later, a telegram arrived. It was short, just 2 words, but they hit Eli like a physical blow, a sudden rush of air leaving his lungs. "It's real." Then another line, "Small vein, get more samples." Eli reread it, then crumpled the paper in his hand. He looked out the window at his parched, empty fields. He was sitting on a gold vein. He walked to the window, the paper still in his hand, and stared out at the dry, useless land, a new kind of silence settling over him. The telegram from Silas sat under a loose floorboard in Eli's bedroom. He checked it every morning just to make sure it was still there. It's real, he didn't tell a soul. The town still thought he was the crazy old man digging a hole to nowhere. That was fine. That was better, even. He woke before dawn, ate a quick solitary breakfast, and was back in the well before the sun fully cleared the horizon. He started digging more systematically, following the vein Silas had described. The work was slow, painstaking. He didn't want to bring up too much dirt, didn't want to draw attention. Each nugget, each flake, he cleaned meticulously, then carried it inside in a canvas bag. He'd lift the loose floorboard in his bedroom, slide back the wooden crate, and drop the gold inside. It was heavy, satisfying. The crate filled slowly, a silent, glittering secret. He needed gear, real mining tools, a pump for the well, a truck, but he couldn't buy them in town. Everyone would know. He contacted another old friend, a rancher named Gus, who lived 2 towns over, a place where Eli wasn't known, where his reputation didn't precede him. Gus was a man who understood discretion. Eli sent him money, not much at first, just enough for a few small items, a new pickaxe, a couple of heavy-duty shovels. Gus bought them, no questions asked, under his own name, then left them for Eli at a pre-arranged spot by the old county line. Later, bigger things came. A drilling rig, a flatbed truck, all bought quietly, slowly from other places, through Gus, under names that no one in his town had ever heard of. Eli just kept digging. The smell of stale beer and cheap whiskey hung heavy in the air. Eli sat at the back of the town bar, a single glass of water in front of him. He wasn't there to drink, he was there to listen. A group of men, including Paul Danton, the banker, were at a table near the window, their voices loud and loose. Old Eli Mercer, one of them slurred, still out there digging. Must think he's going to find water with a spoon. Danton chuckled. Or gold, maybe. Idiot doesn't know when to quit. He took a long swig from his glass. Poor fool. Lost it all. His own son turned his back. Another man laughed, a harsh braying sound. And the barn, heard he just stood there watching it burn. Nobody lifted a finger. Eli didn't react. His face remained a mask. He just listened. He had heard worse. He had endured worse. But something was different now. Before the words had been salt in an open wound. Now they were just words. He watched them, their faces flushed, their gestures sloppy. A cold, quiet resolve settled over him, the first seed of revenge. He didn't lash out. He didn't even clench his fist. He just watched, and he remembered. Later that night, back in his quiet, empty house, Eli took out a small, leather-bound notebook. It was plain, unassuming. He opened it to the first blank page. He took a pen, dipped it in ink, and began to write. He wrote about the dry well, the dying cattle. He wrote about Danton's smug smile. He wrote about Jacob's words, stubborn old fool. He wrote about the fire, and the laughter, every slight, every betrayal, every insult. He wrote it down, not in anger, but with a precise, almost clinical hand. He wasn't just remembering now, he was documenting. This was just the beginning. Eli needed a new name, something big and impersonal. He didn't want the town to connect the dots. Not yet. He worked with Silas, his geologist friend, and the lawyer Silas recommended, a sharp woman from Phoenix who didn't ask personal questions. Together they registered a new company, Desert Bloom Holdings. It sounded grand, like something from far away, which was exactly the point. Then came the bids, quiet ones, unremarkable ones at first glance. He started with the key water rights for parcels of land along the river, parcels the town considered worthless, too far from the main springs. He put in a bid for the old abandoned grain mill, then the empty lot next to the general store, then through a series of intermediaries and shell companies. He made a quiet offer on the very land the bank sat on. Not the bank building itself, just the land lease. It was all done by the new lawyer, through a string of anonymous financial accounts and proxy investors. Eli signed nothing directly. His name never appeared on a single official document. He continued to live his quiet life on the ranch, still seen as the broken old man digging his useless hole. The gold kept coming out of the ground, piece by piece, filling the crate under his floorboards. The money from Silas's initial assessment, and then the first quiet sales of raw gold to a trusted buyer, funded everything. No one saw the new pickup truck he occasionally drove, parked deep in the back of his property, covered by a tarp. No one knew he spent his evenings studying town property maps, tracing lines with his finger, calculating, planning. Desert Bloom Holdings was a phantom, an entity with no face, no discernible owner. It was there though, slowly, methodically, buying up pieces of the town, one quiet transaction at a time. Eli just waited. The town hall hummed with a different kind of energy that day. It was the annual land auction, usually a dull affair, a few bids on back pasture or unused lots. But this year, the town council had decided to auction off several key water rights from the river, old claims that hadn't been used in decades. Everyone was there, the farmers hoping to expand, the small business owners looking for an edge. Paul Danton, the banker, sat front and center, a confident smirk on his face. He'd been scouting these water rights for weeks, planning to snap them up cheap. Eli Mercer sat in the back row near the door. He wore his usual worn jeans and a plain shirt, looking like any other curious bystander. No one paid him any mind. The auctioneer's voice droned on, lot numbers and opening bids. Danton raised his paddle, a quick, decisive motion. He won the first few small plots easily. He looked pleased. Then came the bigger water rights, the ones everyone wanted. The bidding started, slow and steady, then picked up pace. Danton was in the thick of it, his paddle going up often. But then a new bidder emerged. An unknown firm represented by a sleek, sharp-dressed woman no one in town had ever seen. She sat in the front row, just a few seats from Danton. Her paddle went up, quietly, efficiently, outbidding Danton every time. He tried to match her, his face turning red, but her bids were higher, always higher. Finally, with a sharp crack of the gavel, the auctioneer declared the last, most crucial water rights sold. To Desert Bloom Holdings, he announced, his voice ringing through the hall. A gasp went through the room. Danton slammed his paddle down on the table, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked around, agitated, as if trying to locate this mysterious firm. Eli watched him, and then he watched the sleek woman gather her papers, her face impassive. He stayed in the back, silent, a slight, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Operations on Eli's land began with a quiet hum, then a deeper rumble. A new road was cut, leading directly to the old well site. Heavy machinery, gleaming and new, appeared as if from nowhere. Drill rigs started working day and night, their lights a beacon in the darkness. Trucks, not old farm trucks, but heavy-duty haulers moved in and out, kicking up plumes of dust that settled over the parched fields. The ground trembled faintly at times. Whispers started. At first it was just curiosity. Then, the whispers turned to rumors, growing louder, more specific. "They're digging deep out there. Heard someone found something. Not water." The general store was buzzing. People gathered on street corners, their heads together. Then, a small article appeared in the regional newspaper, a little item buried on page 7. It mentioned a new mining claim filed in the valley, a gold strike. It gave coordinates, official details. The location, Eli Mercer's land. It wasn't a leak, not really. It was public record, but someone, probably the slick lawyer from Desert Bloom Holdings, had made sure it found its way into the right hands. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. The new company, the mystery buyer at the auction, the hum of the drills, the trucks, the gold. The townspeople looked at each other, their faces slowly changing. The laughter stopped. The jokes about the old fool and his dry well died in their throats. Eli Mercer wasn't digging for water. He was digging for something else entirely, and he had found it. The silence in town felt different now. It was heavy, a thick blanket of dawning realization. The knocking on Eli's door was tentative at first, then firmer. He opened it to find Paul Danton, the banker, standing on his porch. Danton was still impeccably dressed, but his usual smug smile was gone. His shoulders seemed a little slouched. "Eli," Danton started, his voice uncharacteristically soft, almost meek. He wrung his hands. "Eli, my old friend, I heard about your good fortune. Just wanted to come by and say, well, bygones, right? All those old debts, consider them forgiven. Water under the bridge. The bank, we'd be honored to handle your new accounts. Preferred client status, of course." He shifted his weight, trying to meet Eli's gaze. Eli looked at Danton, his eyes steady. He didn't say anything, he just listened. A few days later, Jacob showed up again. This time, his city car looked a little dusty, and his clothes seemed a bit rumpled. He stood on the porch, looking uncomfortable, his gaze shifting from the ground to the sky, avoiding Eli's eyes. "Dad," Jacob said, his voice hesitant. I messed up. I know I said some things. I was wrong. You were right all along. Look at this place. It's incredible. I've been thinking, my business in the city, it's been tough lately. I was wondering if you needed someone to help manage things here. Partner up maybe. We could really make something of this." He tried for a smile, a desperate fawning look on his face. Eli looked at his son, then at Danton's retreating back, still visible down the road. He listened to Jacob's rushed words, to the thinly veiled desperation beneath the apology. He remembered Jacob's contempt, his dismissal. He remembered Danton's enjoyment of his fall. Eli stood for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then slowly, deliberately, he reached out and quietly shut the door. He didn't slam it. He didn't say a word. He just closed it. The first quiet donation was for the new school roof. It had been leaking for years, and the town council couldn't find the funds. Then suddenly the money appeared, an anonymous donation from a friend of the valley. Soon after, new hymnals showed up at the church, and a fresh coat of paint went on the old town hall, all attributed to the same vague benefactor. Eli Mercer knew exactly where the money came from, but he made sure no one else did. He used a series of small local charities to funnel the funds, ensuring the money went where it was needed, but never directly from him. He started hearing the stories. Mrs. Henderson's medical bills were covered by an unknown donor. Old man Miller, whose farm had nearly gone under, received a quiet loan that saved his land. Eli made sure the help reached those who had always been kind, those who had simply watched in silence during his fall, or offered a quiet nod of sympathy. But for those who had laughed, who had mocked him, who had betrayed him, Paul Danton, the men at the bar, his own son Jacob, there was nothing. When Danton's bank started to struggle, losing clients to bigger city institutions, Eli let it. When Jacob called again, hinting at financial trouble, Eli's phone simply rang unanswered. The town, unknowingly, became dependent on his quiet kindness. They talked about the mysterious benefactor, wondering who it could be, how generous they were. Eli would hear the conversations in the general store or at the cafe. He'd nod or offer a non-committal grunt. He never corrected them. The town slowly began to thrive again, not because of its own efforts, but because of an unseen hand, a hand that remembered every single slight. It was a subtle, elegant turning of the tables, a form of revenge far more potent than any shout or fist. The town hall meeting was packed. The main topic was the new water rights, specifically the ones now owned by Desert Bloom Holdings. People were agitated, nervous. They talked in hushed tones about the gold mine, about Eli Mercer. They knew he was connected, but no one was quite sure how deep that connection ran. Paul Danton was there, pale and drawn, along with Jacob, who sat in the back, looking restless. The mayor called the meeting to order, and the arguments began. People stood, waved their hands, complained about rising costs, about uncertainty. After nearly an hour of shouting, Eli Mercer slowly stood up from his seat in the third row. A ripple went through the crowd. No one had expected him to come. No one had expected him to speak. He walked to the front of the room, to the podium, his movements calm, deliberate. He adjusted the microphone, a faint whisper echoing through the hall. He looked out at the faces in the crowd. He saw Danton. He saw Jacob. He saw the faces of the men from the bar. He saw the faces of the people who had stood by and watched his barn burn. For those of you who don't know, Eli began, his voice calm, clear, reaching every corner of the room. I am Eli Mercer, and for those of you who do know me, well, you know what I've been through. He paused. The room was utterly silent. You may have heard about Desert Bloom Holdings, the company that now owns half the valley's water rights. The company that is operating the new gold mine. The company that recently purchased the land lease under your very own bank building. His words hung in the air, each one a stone dropping into a still pond. He let the information sink in, watching their faces. Some were pale, some shifted in their seats. Paul Danton's jaw dropped, a slow, stunned movement. Eli looked directly at the crowd. I remember every laugh, he said, his voice still calm, but with an edge of steel. Every joke, every turned back, every whispered curse. He swept his gaze across the room. I remember it all. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He simply stated the facts. Then he turned and walked back to his seat, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. The days that followed the town meeting were strange ones. Some townsfolk, a handful of older women, a few quiet men who had always been decent, approached Eli. They didn't offer excuses, they just said, Eli, I'm sorry, we were wrong, we should have helped. They looked him in the eye, their faces etched with regret. Eli listened to each one. He didn't offer long speeches, he just nodded, a small, almost imperceptible tilt of his head. It's all right, he said, and he meant it. He could see genuine shame in their eyes, and that was enough. He offered a hand, a quiet word. He forgave them. But many others couldn't face him. Paul Danton left town a week later, quietly selling his bank shares to a distant cousin and moving away. No one saw him go. The men from the bar, the ones who had laughed the loudest, started to avoid the general store when Eli was there. Some packed up their families and simply left the valley, unable to live with the shame or the bitterness. Their trucks rumbled down the dusty road, leaving empty houses behind. Jacob came back one last time. He didn't get out of his car. He just pulled up to the front gate, the engine running. Eli walked out, stood by the fence. Jacob rolled down the window. Dad, he said, his voice flat. I can't be here. Not like this. He looked at Eli, a strange mix of fear and resentment in his eyes. He couldn't handle what his father had become, the powerful, quiet force he now was. He couldn't handle the ghost he'd called his father, now so undeniably real. Eli just looked at him, his expression unreadable. Jacob nodded once, a quick, jerky motion, and then he put the car in gear and drove away. This time, Eli knew it was for good. He was truly alone, but the quiet solitude felt different now. Eli used his wealth, not just for himself, but for the valley. He established a community trust, named not after himself, but simply the Valley Foundation. Its purpose was clear, to help young ranchers establish themselves, to provide aid for widows and families who fell on hard times, to fund scholarships for local children. He made sure the money went to people who genuinely needed a hand, people like he once was, before his rise. He guided the trust quietly, remaining mostly in the background, a silent benefactor. His first personal project was rebuilding the barn. He hired local carpenters, the ones who had always treated him with respect. He wanted it exactly like the old one, down to the weathered beams, the way the light fell through the high windows. It rose from the ashes, strong and new, but looking like it had always been there, a testament to what could be resurrected. He walked inside it, the smell of fresh wood comforting, and ran his hand over the sturdy posts. The small leather-bound notebook, the one where he had documented every slight, every betrayal, every insult, it still sat in his desk drawer. He knew it was there. Sometimes he'd reach for it, his fingers brushing against the worn leather, but he never opened it. The words were there, the memories were there, but the need to revisit them was gone. The quiet revenge he had enacted, the dignity he had regained, that was enough. The notebook remained, a reminder of where he had been, but no longer a guide for where he was going. He was building something new, something that honored the past, but lived in the present. 10 years passed. The valley changed. The gold mine boomed, bringing prosperity, but Eli made sure it was controlled, sustainable. The well on his property, once a symbol of his ruin, was now capped with polished brass, a quiet monument. Tourists began to trickle in, then to visit in droves. They came to see the valley, to see the mine, but mostly they came to see the rancher who struck gold. They wanted to hear his story, the tale of the man who lost everything and built it back, grander than before. The town, once dependent on dusty cattle and dry farms, adapted. New businesses sprang up, gift shops, little diners, tour companies offering rides to the mine site. And who ran many of these new ventures? The very same townsfolk who had mocked Eli Mercer. Mrs. Henderson, whose medical bills he'd paid, now ran a small cafe, serving coffee and pies to the visitors. Mr. Davies, who used to joke about Eli's crazy digging, now led jeep tours to the mining operation. They all paid rent. To whom? To Desert Bloom Holdings, of course. Eli's company. He would see them sometimes, these familiar faces, bustling about, serving the tourists, talking excitedly about the prosperity the valley now enjoyed. They didn't laugh anymore. They smiled, nervous and respectful, whenever they saw him. Eli never gloated. He never pointed. He never reminded them of the past. He would simply sit on his porch, watching the sunset paint the new barn golden, a quiet, knowing smile playing on his lips. The final laugh wasn't loud. It was just a smile. Eli was in his 70s now, his back a little more stooped, his steps a little slower. But his eyes were still sharp, still saw everything. He walked his fields at sunset, just as he always had. The land was green again, nourished by the new water systems his company had put in place. The cattle fat and healthy. It was the same place where he had once watched his life fall apart, where the dust had swallowed everything he owned. He walked past the old well, the one he had dug by hand. It was no longer dry. Water flowed freely, pumped from deeper, richer aquifers. The well post, once just a rough piece of wood, was now capped with that brass plate, shining softly in the dying light. He reached out, his gnarled fingers touching the cool metal. He stood there for a long moment, the quiet of the evening settling around him. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and growing things. He mutters, a low rasping sound, almost a whisper to the land itself. They buried me. Didn't know I was a seed. He closed his eyes for a moment, the setting sun warm on his face. The ranch stretched out before him, a testament to resilience, to quiet strength, to a kind of justice only he truly understood.